The vast emptiness of space stretched before Ash Bennett's viewport, an endless canvas of stars that had been his only companion for the past 3 years. His cargo ship, the Stellar Wind, cut through the darkness with practiced ease, its hull weathered but reliable. At 32, Ash had grown accustomed to the solitude of long-haul space routes, finding peace in the quiet hum of his ship's engines. That peace shattered when the first food ration went missing. Ash noticed it during his routine inventory check. One packet of high-grade protein meals had vanished from the carefully organized storage. His first thought was a system error, but 3 more disappeared the next day. Someone was aboard his ship. "Computer, run life form scan," he commanded, fingers drumming against the console. The screen flickered to life, displaying a faint heat signature in the cargo hold. Ash's hand instinctively moved to the stunner at his hip as he made his way down the narrow corridors. The cargo hold was dimly lit, massive crates casting long shadows across the metal floor. Ash moved silently, years of military training guiding his steps. A soft rustle behind a stack of containers caught his attention. "Come out slowly," he called, stunner raised. "I'm armed, but I won't shoot if you cooperate." Silence answered him, then a whisper of movement. From behind the crates emerged the most delicate being Ash had ever seen. She stood barely 4 feet tall, with silvery skin that seemed to capture and reflect the starlight from the nearby viewport. Her large, almond-shaped eyes glowed with an inner light, and 2 translucent antennae curved gracefully from her head. A Stellari. Ash had heard of them but never seen one in person. Their species was rare, known for their empathic abilities and peaceful nature. They were also known for being persecuted across the galaxy, their gentle disposition making them easy targets. "Please," she spoke, her voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "I mean no harm. I just needed to escape." Ash lowered his weapon slightly but maintained his guard. "You're a long way from the stellar nebula. What's your name?" "Naira," she replied, her antennae quivering slightly. "I was fleeing from the Kraken Syndicate. They were going to sell me. My abilities make me valuable to certain buyers." Ash felt his jaw tighten. The Kraken Syndicate was notorious for trafficking rare species. "How long have you been hiding here?" 3 days, Naira admitted, wringing her small hands. "I slipped aboard at the last station. I can work to pay for my passage. I'm stronger than I look, and I have medical training." Ash studied her for a long moment. Every regulation said he should turn her in at the next port. Harboring stowaways carried heavy fines, even prison time. But something in those luminous eyes called to him, stirring protective instincts he thought he'd buried long ago. "You've been careful with the rations," he said finally. "Taking just enough to survive. Why didn't you take more?" Naira's antennae perked up slightly. "I didn't want to be a burden. And I sensed you were kind. Your ship feels different from others, peaceful, like its captain." Ash found himself smiling despite his best efforts. "Empathic abilities, right? That must be interesting." "Sometimes," she said, returning his smile tentatively. "Right now, I sense you're conflicted. But there's no malice in you, only concern." Running a hand through his dark hair, Ash holstered his stunner. "The next station is 2 weeks away. If you're staying, you'll need proper quarters and real meals. But we'll need to be careful. Not everyone would understand." The joy that bloomed across Naira's face was like watching a star ignite. "Thank you. I promise you won't regret this." As he showed her to the spare cabin, Ash couldn't shake the feeling that his lonely life had just changed irrevocably. The stellar wind seemed brighter somehow, as if Naira's inner light had already begun to fill its empty spaces. That night, as Ash lay in his bunk, he found himself thinking about her story, her courage in fleeing her captors, her gentleness despite all she'd endured. He'd always thought his life was complete with just him and his ship. Now he wasn't so sure. Little did he know, this was just the beginning of an adventure that would challenge everything he thought he knew about strength, love, and the true measure of a being's worth. The stellar wind's corridors no longer echoed with solitude. After a week with Naira aboard, Ash found himself adjusting to the gentle patter of her footsteps and the soft hum of her voice as she worked. Despite her small size, she proved remarkably capable, her delicate fingers deftly handling repairs that would have challenged even the most experienced engineer. "Your ship's neural relays were misaligned," she explained one morning, emerging from a maintenance shaft that even Ash found cramped. Her silvery skin was smudged with grease, but her eyes sparkled with satisfaction. "That's why the artificial gravity kept fluctuating in the port quarter." Ash handed her a cleaning cloth, trying not to stare at the way her antennae swayed with each movement. "You're full of surprises. Where did you learn engineering?" "We Stellari are taught to understand energy flows from childhood," she said, wiping her hands. "Your technology isn't so different from reading emotional currents." Their conversation was interrupted by a violent shudder that ran through the ship. Warning lights flashed across the control panels as the stellar wind bucked like a wild thing. "What the hell?" Ash rushed to the cockpit, Naira close behind. The viewport revealed a massive storm of quantum particles, its swirling purple-black mass directly in their path. These storms were rare but deadly, known for tearing ships apart at the molecular level. The navigational computers frozen, Ash growled, his fingers flying over the controls. "We can't plot a course around it." Naira pressed her hands against the console, her antennae extending straight out. "The storm, it's alive, in a way. I can feel its patterns." "Alive?" Ash glanced at her, then back at the approaching maelstrom. "Can you predict its movements?" She nodded, her expression intense with concentration. "Yes, but you'll have to trust me." "Completely." Another impact rocked the ship. They had seconds to decide. Ash looked at the delicate being beside him, who'd proven her worth a dozen times over in the past week. "Guide me." What followed was unlike anything Ash had ever experienced. Naira called out the storm's shifts moments before they happened, while he piloted based on her predictions. They moved in perfect synchronization, the ship dancing through the quantum turbulence like a leaf in the wind. "Hard port." Naira called. "Now dive, level out, there's a pocket of calm ahead." Ash followed her directions without hesitation, his trust in her absolute. The stellar wind responded to their combined efforts, threading through the storm's fury with impossible grace. When they finally emerged on the other side, both collapsed into their seats, exhausted but alive. The ship's hull creaked ominously, but held. "That was..." Ash started. "Beautiful," Naira finished, her eyes shining. "The way you understood exactly what I meant, how you translated my feelings into action. I've never experienced anything like it." Their gazes met, and something electric passed between them. Ash felt his heart skip a beat. In that moment, their size difference, their different species, none of it mattered. They were just two souls who'd found something extraordinary in each other. The moment was broken by another warning alarm. The storm had damaged their primary power core. Without repairs, they'd be stranded in deep space. "I can fix it," Naira said, already standing. "But I'll need your help. The components are too heavy for me to move alone." Ash nodded, following her to the engine room. As they worked together, passing tools and sharing ideas, he found himself marveling at how natural it felt. Her small hands would reach places he couldn't, while his strength complemented her precision. Hours later, with the power core stabilized and the ship's systems returning to normal, they sat together in the galley, sharing a meal of rehydrated stew. "You know," Ash said thoughtfully, "I used to think I preferred working alone. No complications, no one to worry about but myself." Naira tilted her head, her antennae curving toward him with interest. "And now? Now I'm starting to think I was wrong." He met her gaze steadily. "Some complications are worth it." A soft blush spread across her silvery skin, making it shimmer like stardust. "I'm glad you think so," she whispered. "Because I've never felt as safe, as understood, as I do here." As they sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars streak by through the galley viewport, Ash realized something fundamental had shifted between them. The storm hadn't just tested their ability to work together, it had forged something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified him. The stellar wind continued its journey through the void, but its corridors now hummed with more than just machinery. They resonated with the growing connection between two beings who, against all odds, had found something precious in the vast emptiness of space. Starbase Omega loomed before the stellar wind like a metal behemoth, its docking arms extended in an unwelcoming embrace. Ash had been dreading this stop, but they needed supplies and repairs after the quantum storm. More importantly, he needed to make a decision about Naira's future. "You're worried," Naira said softly from the co-pilot's seat, her antennae drooping slightly. "Your emotions are turbulent." Ash's hands tightened on the controls. Omega Station isn't known for its tolerance. The consortium that runs it has some outdated views about non-human species. "I can stay hidden," she offered, though her luminous eyes betrayed her hurt. "No," Ash said firmly. "No more hiding. You're my crew now, officially." He pulled up the ship's roster on the display, showing where he'd registered her as the Stellar Wind's medical officer and engineer. The documentation was carefully crafted, legal but vague enough to avoid unwanted questions. Naira's eyes widened, her skin shimmering with emotion. "Ash, you didn't have to." "Yes, I did." He met her gaze. "Whatever happens, we face it together." The docking procedure went smoothly, but trouble found them as soon as they stepped onto the station. The customs officer, a burly human with cold eyes, sneered when he saw Naira. "We don't see many of your kind here," he said, deliberately looming over her. "Bit small for real work, aren't you?" Ash stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of his military days. "Officer, my engineer has more skill in her little finger than most have in their entire body. Are we done here?" The man's face reddened, but he waved them through. As they walked away, Ash noticed Naira trembling slightly. "Their hatred," she whispered. "It's like a physical weight. How do they carry so much darkness?" Ash resisted the urge to take her hand. "Not everyone thinks that way. Things are changing, slowly but surely." They made their way through the station's crowded corridors, gathering supplies and arranging repairs. Ash couldn't help but notice how Naira drew stares, some curious, some hostile. She held her head high, but he could sense her discomfort. In a parts shop, while Naira expertly selected replacement components, Ash overheard two mechanics whispering. "Disgusting, isn't it? Humans keeping aliens as pets now. Wonder what else he uses her for." Before Ash could react, Naira was beside him, her small hand on his arm. "They're not worth it," she said softly. "Their words come from ignorance, not understanding." Her touch calmed him, but shame burned in his chest. "You shouldn't have to endure this." "I've faced worse," she said, managing a smile. "Besides, I have something now that makes it bearable." Her antennae curved toward him in what he'd learned was a gesture of affection. That evening, they found a quiet corner in one of the station's observation lounges. Through the massive windows, they watched ships come and go against the backdrop of endless stars. "I've been thinking," Naira said suddenly. "About what those people said. About us." Ash tensed. "Naira. Let me finish," she interrupted, her voice gaining strength. "All my life, I've been told I'm too small, too weak, too different. But these past weeks with you, you've never once made me feel that way. You see me, Ash. The real me." He turned to face her, struck by how the starlight played across her silvery skin. "How could I not? You're the most remarkable person I've ever met. Even though I'm not human." Her question hung in the air between them. Because you're you, he answered simply. Size, species, none of that matters. What matters is here. He touched his chest, over his heart. Naira's eyes filled with tears that caught the light like diamonds. I think I'm falling in love with you, she whispered. And it terrifies me. Ash reached out, gently wiping away a tear with his thumb. Why does it terrify you? Because love between species like us, it's not just frowned upon, it's dangerous. Look at how they treat me just for working with you. If they knew. Let them know, Ash said fiercely. I'm tired of living by other people's rules, their prejudices. I'm falling in love with you too, Naira. And I'm not afraid to admit it. She looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. You mean that? Instead of answering, Ash leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, a gesture he'd learned was deeply intimate among her people. Her antennae brushed his face gently, sending a shiver down his spine. The moment was shattered by an alarm blaring through the station. Red emergency lights began flashing, and a computerized voice echoed through the corridors, warning. Unauthorized vessels approaching. All civilians proceed to secure areas immediately. Ash and Naira shared a look of concern. Through the observation window, they could see multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, ships with the distinctive profile of raiders. Their moment of truth had arrived sooner than expected, and it would test not just their love, but their very survival. The raiders hit Omega Station with devastating precision. 6 warships, their hulls scarred and menacing, opened fire on the station's outer defenses. Chaos erupted through the corridors as civilians ran for shelter. We need to get back to the stellar wind, Ash said, pulling Naira close as another explosion rocked the station. Those aren't ordinary raiders, they're too organized. Naira's antennae quivered. Ash, it's the Kraken Syndicate. I can sense their leader's presence. They followed us here. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. They had tracked Naira, waiting for them to stop somewhere vulnerable. Now thousands of innocent lives were at risk because he had chosen to protect her. This isn't your fault, Naira said firmly, reading his emotions. And we can help these people if we work together. They fought their way through panicked crowds, Ash clearing a path while Naira used her empathic abilities to sense incoming danger. When they reached the docking bay, they found it in chaos. Several ships were already destroyed, and raiders were pouring in through a breached airlock. The stellar wind sat 3 bays down, seemingly untouched. But between them and their ship stood a dozen heavily armed raiders, led by a towering figure Naira recognized instantly. Captain Vex, she whispered, shrinking back. He's the one who tried to sell me. Vex stood nearly 7 feet tall, his cybernetic eye glowing red as it scanned the area. I know you're here, little Stellari, he called out, his voice like grinding metal. Come out now, and perhaps I'll let your human pet live. Ash pulled Naira behind a cargo container, his mind racing. The maintenance tunnels, he whispered. If we can reach the access panel behind those crates. No, Naira said, her voice steady despite her fear. I'm tired of running. These people need help, and we can give it to them. Before Ash could stop her, Naira stepped out from their hiding place. But something was different about her. Her silvery skin was glowing with an inner light, and her antennae stood straight up, crackling with energy. Looking for me, Vex, she called out, her musical voice carrying an edge of steel. The raiders turned, weapons raised, but Naira was already moving. Her hands spread wide, and suddenly the raiders' weapons flew from their grips, clattering against the ceiling. Ash had known Stellari had telekinetic abilities, but he'd never seen anything like this. Now, Ash, she cried. He didn't hesitate. Years of military training took over as he burst from cover, stunning 3 raiders before they could recover. Naira's telekinetic force held the others at bay, though the effort was clearly straining her. Vex laughed, the sound like breaking glass. Impressive, little one. But you forget, I'm shielded against psychic attacks. He raised his cybernetic arm, which transformed into a plasma cannon. Time seemed to slow. Ash saw Vex taking aim at Naira, saw her strength failing as she held back the other raiders. Without thinking, he threw himself forward, tackling her small form just as Vex fired. The plasma bolt seared past them, melting the deck plating where they had stood. They rolled behind a pillar, Ash's body shielding Naira. I won't let them take you, he promised. Naira's eyes met his, filled with determination. Together, she said, placing her small hand in his. Like the quantum storm. Understanding flooded through him. Just as they had navigated the storm through perfect synchronization, they could face this threat the same way. He felt her consciousness brush against his, their connection deepening until they moved as one. What followed was a dance of deadly precision. Naira's telekinetic powers guided Ash's movements, while his combat experience enhanced her control. They flowed around each other like binary stars, taking down raiders with stunning efficiency. Vex, enraged, charged at them with inhuman speed. But he had never faced anything like their combined strength. Naira lifted Ash into the air, adding momentum to his kick that caught Vex in his cybernetic eye. As the raider leader staggered, Ash fired his stunner directly into the damaged cybernetics. The mighty Vex fell, his systems overloading. The remaining raiders, seeing their leader defeated, began to retreat. Station security finally arrived, led by the same customs officer who had sneered at Naira earlier. His expression now was one of disbelief. How did you? He began, staring at the unconscious raiders. Size isn't everything, Naira said simply, swaying slightly from exhaustion. Ash caught her gently, cradling her small form against his chest. The customs officer looked between them, something shifting in his gaze. No, he said slowly. I suppose it isn't. As station security rounded up the raiders, Ash carried Naira back to the stellar wind. Her antennae drooped with fatigue, but her eyes shone with triumph. I told you we'd be stronger together, she murmured. Ash pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. You never cease to amaze me. Rest now, you've more than earned it. As he laid her in her bunk, Ash realized something profound had changed on Omega Station. They had shown everyone that love wasn't about physical size or species, it was about the size of one's heart, the strength of one's spirit. And in that regard, Naira's heart was greater than any he had ever known. The stellar wind might need repairs, but its crew had never been stronger. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, two hearts beating as one across the vast expanse of space. News of the battle at Omega Station spread quickly through the galaxy's trading routes. The story of a human and a Stellari fighting as one against the notorious Kraken Syndicate became something of a legend, told and retold in spacer bars across the sectors. But for Ash and Naira, the real challenge was just beginning. 2 months after the raid, the Stellar Wind docked at New Terra Colony, where the Interstellar Council maintained its headquarters. They had been summoned to testify about the Syndicate attack, but both knew there was more at stake. The Council wants to make an example of us, Naira said, adjusting her formal robes. They were Stellari made, but modified to complement her partner's human military dress uniform. Our relationship challenges everything they think they know about interspecies bonds. Ash took her small hand in his. Let them try to separate us. We've faced worse. The council chamber was a vast amphitheater, its curved walls displaying real-time feeds from 100 worlds. Representatives from every major species filled the tiered seats, their murmurs dying as Ash and Naira entered. High Counselor Thrain, a venerable Andoran known for his progressive views, spoke first. Captain Ash Bennett, Medical Officer Naira, you stand before us as something unprecedented. Your actions at Omega Station were heroic, yet they raise concerns. Concerns? Ash's voice carried clearly through the chamber. About what, exactly? That we proved size and species don't determine a person's worth? A reptilian counselor leaned forward. The natural order. There is nothing natural about hatred, Naira interrupted, her musical voice strong and clear. I have felt the emotions in this room, fear, confusion, prejudice. But I also sense curiosity, hope, and the potential for understanding. She stepped forward, her silvery skin glowing under the chamber lights. Look at us. I stand barely half his height. Our physiologies are completely different. By your standards, we shouldn't even be able to communicate effectively. Yet our bond saved hundreds of lives at Omega Station. Our differences made us stronger, not weaker. High Counselor Thrain raised a hand for silence as debate erupted. You speak of bonds, Medical Officer Naira. Are you claiming a romantic attachment to Captain Bennett? I am, she said proudly. And I challenge anyone in this chamber to prove our love is less real, less valid, than any other. Ash moved to stand beside her. Every argument against us boils down to fear of the unknown. But look around you, we live in a galaxy of infinite diversity. Why should love be confined by arbitrary boundaries? A holographic display activated in the center of the chamber, showing footage from Omega Station. The council watched in silence as Ash and Naira moved in perfect synchronization, their strengths complementing each other flawlessly. The stellar winds logs show that your efficiency ratings have increased by 40% since Medical Officer Naira joined your crew, Thrain noted. And your success against the Kraken Syndicate led to the liberation of 3 trafficking rings. These are not the actions of an unnatural partnership. Hours of deliberation followed. Ash and Naira stood firm, their hands clasped, as the council debated their fate. Finally, Thrain spoke again. This council was established to promote understanding between species. It would be hypocrisy to condemn a relationship that embodies that very principle. Captain Bennett, Medical Officer Naira, you have our blessing, and our apology for doubting the authenticity of your bond. The declaration sparked a wave of change across the galaxy. The stellar wind became a symbol of hope, proving that love could flourish in the most unexpected places. Other interspecies couples, long hidden in the shadows, began to step forward. 1 year later, Ash and Naira stood in the stellar wind's observation deck, watching a binary star system paint the viewport in shades of gold and blue. Naira's antennae curved lovingly toward Ash as he wrapped his arms around her. They're still talking about us, you know, she said, amused. The tiny Stellari and her human captain. Some still can't understand it. They don't need to understand, Ash replied, pressing a kiss to her silvery hair. Understanding comes with time. What matters is that we changed things. Made the galaxy a little better, a little more accepting. Naira turned in his embrace, looking up at him with eyes that held entire universes. Do you ever regret it? Taking in a stowaway who turned your life upside down? Never, he said firmly. You taught me that the greatest things in life can come in unexpected packages. Size, species, distance, none of it matters when 2 hearts beat as one. The stellar wind cruised onward through the cosmos, its corridors filled with the warmth of their love. And in its wake, it left a trail of hope, hope that in a universe vast beyond measuring, the only true measure of love was the size of one's heart. For Ash and Naira had proven that sometimes the smallest beings carried the greatest capacity for love, and that true strength lay not in physical size, but in the courage to love without boundaries. Their story became more than just a legend, it became a promise that love, in all its forms, would always find a way to shine among the stars.